The Susan Brender Show is a radio show online broadcasted on YouTube across the United States and globally. The show features guests who speak about health, spirituality, entertainment, and a host of subjects to enlighten people across the nation. Listen to the show that empowers women and men alike and highlights those who have made a difference. I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. You know, I have two guests on my show coming up, and one of them is Michael Solomon, who's been on my show many times, and he's a very interesting guy. And I can say the same thing for Joel Segal. He too has been a very interesting guest. But today, before I say that, I want to read something to you from the newspapers. Democrats are in recrimination mode after the implosion of their multi-trillion-dollar spending bill. And one dishonest narrative is Joe Manchin. Now, here's the thing about Joe Manchin. He's callous about child poverty. For months, Mr. Manchin and these columns raised substantive concerns about monthly cash payments for families that Democrats have never bothered to address. Now, this is something that I'm sure Michael is going to want to talk about, and definitely Joel is going to want to talk about it. So I want to introduce them to you if I can. And let's start with Michael Solomon. And Michael Solomon is a former NYPD detective. He was assigned to the Organized Crime Control Bureau and the Intelligence Division. After his police career, he founded his own business. Now, that is the start of it. It goes a little longer, but, you know, we really want to say that Michael is a writer and an author, and he's an author of the newest book called Under the Divi Tree, True Love Needs No Reason, which is a very interesting book, I have to tell you, Michael. Now, you, Joel, let me give you, or give our audience, a little bit understanding of who you are again. Former senior legislative assistant to Representative John Connors from 2000 to 2003, national campaign director, Bringing America Home Now campaign sponsored by the National Coalition for the Homeless and National Campaign to End Homeless. There's so much more that he's really all about, but let's stop now and let's talk about Joe Manchin and the child poverty situation.
Well, where would you like to start, Susan?
Well, let's begin with what you feel about it. You know, Michael, you and I talked about this, and I know that you have a little bit of a difference between what Joel would think, but that doesn't matter. We want to hear your opinion of it. And Joel, jump in when you think you can.
I think if from what I read in the bill, it's not a child care credit, because in order to get a child care credit, I mean, they're calling it that, but it's not that. Because in order to get a child care credit, you got to pay taxes. If you don't file an income tax return, you can't get a credit. So they want to give $300 to $400 a month for every child in your family. If you earn under $400,000 a year, it's a gift. It's not really a credit against your taxes. I mean, this is no different than it was. I remember in New York City, and I think Joel's from New York, he'd remember this, years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and they're still doing it today, by the way. For every child you had out of wedlock, if you were on welfare, you got $400 a month. Just to have, that's why people were having babies left and right. They were doing, it was a factory to make money. That's basically what it was. And the Build Back Better plan has got that provision in it that they're going to give away $300 to $400 a month for every child you have. And that's crazy. And it's not, by the way, it's also for illegals. It's not only just for U.S. citizens. These are anybody in the United States, whether or not you file taxes or whether or not you work. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that money's coming out of every taxpayer's pocket. So I don't know where they're coming from. Even Larry Summers, who was Obama's Treasury Secretary, said it's ridiculous. It's crazy. So I don't know where we're going to go with this. But I think Manchin's correct. I wouldn't vote for this.
Joel, what's your thoughts about it?
Well, I'm a policy analyst, and my background is law and public policy. So I try to evaluate everything based on, is the policy going to help people, or is it not? The Build Back Better plan has so many components. It has climate change components, clean renewable energy components. It does have the child tax credit. There's lots of different components to BBB. It's the best bill that I've ever seen. And now I worked in Congress from 2000 to 2013. I was there for 13 years. Most of the bills that I wrote, the bill Medicare for All, which did not pass, but it gave the impetus for what's called Obamacare. I am a proponent of child tax credits if it's going to go to families that absolutely need to have it. I'm not for a work requirement, although I'm very conservative when it comes to work. I think everyone should have to work unless they're disabled. People say I'm too conservative. I'm not conservative. I just think working is a very good thing. Child tax credits, if you look at the studies that the New York Times has been writing about, majority of the child tax credit has gone to cover for childcare, school supplies, food, medical expenses. I mean, if you look at co-pays alone, they will eat up a lot of your paycheck. So the premise that it's being used, this is what Joe Manchin had said, his fear was that it was going to be used for I think drugs and alcohol. The evidence does not show that. However, I'd have to see for myself as an objective policy analyst, is the policy working? Yes or no. Right now, it is working. I do support it. I do feel very strongly about Manchin. I think that Manchin is not doing the right thing. I think he's being very dishonest. I think the main reason why he is not supporting BBB, it's not because of inflation. It's not because he couldn't sell the bill. It's because he was afraid that he might have to tax his very, very wealthy donors at a higher rate to pay for BBB. And number two, he keeps voting against, he wants to take out anything dealing with climate change provisions to protect the coal industry. Well, guess what? The coal unions in West Virginia want the child tax credit because it's been working for them. I wouldn't put coal miners in the category of a bunch of left-wing, radicals. Okay, they're coal miners. But Manchin is holding up a very, very important bill, but especially with climate change. Climate change, and I'm going to close with this, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it cannot be politicized, it's strictly physics and chemistry. It is not even debatable. We have less than 10 years to transition 80% to 100% cleanable energy. Now that's the assessment of 13,000 scientists. That's not even debatable. Manchin voted against the survival of our civilization. I am very angry about this. I am very concerned, and so should all of you. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. You don't want to see the destruction of the planet because someone makes $500,000 from his coal assets. So at the same time, what Biden needs to do, I don't know how sophisticated their team is, but having negotiated with 3 presidents, I know a lot about negotiations because I've been successful at it. What they should have done is gone to Manchin and said, look, we're going to make sure that we're going to quadruple the amount of jobs in solar, wind, or battery, and we're going to build them, in West Virginia. I don't know if they did that or not, because if they did, I think there would have been a better chance that Manchin would have said yes. All that being said, I think Manchin did the wrong thing on this. I think it was the wrong thing for the country and the wrong thing for the planet. It's unforgivable. I feel very strongly about this, as you can tell.
Michael, I know that you have a lot to say about climate change. And even though we're talking about Manchin, which I wanted you to go back and answer Joel, I'd like your opinion about whether this climate change is really important for us to know more about.
Well, here's the problem that you're going to have to understand. Number one, they're going to spend close to $1 trillion on climate change per year for the next 10 years under the Paris Climate Accord. The problem is this. Number one, the Paris Climate Accord has nothing to do with climate change. It has to do with clean air and clean environment. And they think that that's going to be the route to climate change. It's supposed to be for greenhouse gases. The United States has surpassed completely and exceeded the provisions of the Paris Climate Accord. The money we're going to be giving them is not for anything that we can do because we've already surpassed it. Our energy, our climate is back to 2005 limits, which is what they want. That's number one. Number two, there are 156 active volcanoes in the world currently. One of those eruptions, and we get about 2 or 3 a year, one of those eruptions is enough to set back the Paris climate change 50 years. So the fact that they want this to be a 100-year plan to not increase temperatures by 1.5 degrees Celsius is absolutely ridiculous. And two, the two largest polluters in the world, India and China, are exempt for the next 15 years from the plan. Where are they? Why are we paying? Why are we going to be paying our taxpayers? And why is everybody in the United States going to be paying for something that we've already surpassed what we need to do? And I've proven to beyond reasonable doubt. Joel, I'm going to send you. I'll send you all the photos that I've got that's showing that the fact that the world governments are actually being lied to. They're actually being lied to about climate change. It's all where the money is. When Al Gore is making $220 million a year on average, brokering carbon credits, you've got a problem.
Yeah. Michael, let's go back to the notion of what Joel said with regard to Joe Manchin. We'll go back to climate change in a minute and let you answer that, Joel. But for the moment, I would like to hear what Michael says about Joe Manchin.
I think Joe Manchin's correct. And I'll tell you what, if they keep bullying him the way they're doing and keep pushing him against a wall, he's going to switch parties. He's not going to become a Republican. He'll become an independent. And guess what happens then, Joel? Schumer is out because the Republicans will have the majority in the Senate, and Schumer will be gone.
Joel, do you agree or disagree with him?
Whenever you're dealing with someone who disagrees with you, first of all, you got to agree to be civil. That's number one. You can't embarrass people and say bad. I mean, as a student of the Torah, it's one of the things I really believe in is you don't call people out and embarrass them. So there's some truth to that statement. However, at the same time, if one senator, not the House of Representatives, not the rest of the 49 other senators who've agreed with this bill, one senator is blocking very important progress that's going to help working families, families who dig coal and get bistanosis and black and white lung who need the child tax credit. There's no evidence whatsoever that our climate is at homeostasis. We're very close to. There's 13,000 scientists who've said this. We're very close to exceeding the 1.5 degree increase centigrade in temperature. If that happens, climate change is irreversible. If you think the fires and the flooding and the drought is bad now, it is going to be calamitous. That's not political. That's physics and science. Manchin is wrong. Where he's being selfish. Instead of looking at the best interest of working families in West Virginia, and the health of the planet, he's putting his own self-interest, which is $500,000 a year in profit. I don't have any problem with profit. I'm a capitalist. I like money a lot, actually. But I do have a problem when there is a conflict of interest, when you're supposed to represent your state of West Virginia, when you're not telling the truth about why you're voting no. He voted no because he didn't want to tax the high income donors. And he's worried about the coal industry and the lobbyists that give him all this money. It's wrong. We often hear conservatives talk about conflict of interest. This is about as much of a conflict of interest as I've ever seen. It's un-American and it's inexcusable. And he has to be held accountable. But you got to do it in a way where you don't embarrass him, you don't put dirt in his mouth, and you don't poke him in the nose. But Manchin is wrong.
Why are you blaming one senator when it's 51 senators who are against it? Not one. There's one Democrat who's against it, but there are 50 other senators who are Republicans. And by the way, Seamer is still against it too. So it's two of them. It's not just Joe Manchin.
No, that is a very fair point, by the way. And if you look at, when I worked with George W. Bush, and I worked with him very well for 8 years, and I used to write bills for Republicans. There was way much more camaraderie, way much more unity on policy. And the best example, I led the effort on global HIV/AIDS. I worked very well with President Bush and his administration. These 50 senators from the other side do have to be held accountable, and hopefully it'll be at the ballot box. But we can't continue to stick our heads in the sand like an ostrich and pretend like climate change doesn't exist, poverty doesn't exist, senior citizens who can't afford Medicare and prescription drugs and glasses and dental. This is not left or right. This is right or wrong. It's wrong to have millions and millions of people living in poverty, especially seniors, when they deserve a fair deal. And the Republican Party, I think, is the most dangerous organization in the world. They have no policies that I've seen whatsoever. George Bush, the father, Nixon created the EPA and Nixon created CETA. The modern Republican Party has no solutions except they're the party of no. No, we're not going to pass any bills dealing with climate change. Yes, we'll pass voter suppression bills. There's something really wrong with this party, but then there are also moderates in the Republican Party who got to be lifted up and heard. There are moderates in the Republican Party that got to be lifted up and heard.
Joel, why is it that a lot of people speak about Joe Manchin and they say that there is even a possibility, and I just say a possibility, of him running for president because they feel that what he says makes so much sense? And I'm interested in knowing from you, Michael, you just heard what Joel said. Do you agree with him?
Well, I agree with him. One thing, that the Republicans are the party of no, except it's spelled K-N-O-W. I agree with him on certain things, but the one thing I will tell you, Joel, is I don't deny global climate change. There is climate change. What I do deny is the fact that man can't do anything about it to change it. We can stop breathing tomorrow. We can park every car on the road. We could shut down every factory. There is still going to be CO2. There is still going to be climate change. There is nothing we can do about it. You and I know this. Where was the climate change in the 1800s? 18,000 years ago was the warmest period on record, the Celio Maxima period in history. Where were the factories 18,000 years ago? We didn't even have an industrial revolution back then. That was the warmest period on air. You and I would have been sitting on ice right now because the whole North America was one giant glacier. One giant glacier.
Michael, I'm gonna jump in here.
Go ahead.
Listen, 13,000 scientists.
Consensus, Joel. That's consensus science, not empirical science.
No, it's not, Michael. Respectfully, this is why it's so hard in American culture versus, let's say, Europe or even Asia to solve a problem. You can't solve a problem if we can't agree that climate change, A, is man-made, B, how do you control it? It's very simple. I'm an expert on this issue. I teach it at colleges, and I'm going to be writing probably the bill to get us to 100% clean renewable energy. And I'm being entrusted by leading climate scientists around the world to write that bill for them. And it's real simple. You have to put a cap on CO2 and methane release so that we get to net zero by 2050 or sooner. This is not political. It's just science and physics. Climate change, everyone knows there's always going to be climate change, but climate change is absolutely man-made. Go. I believe Harvey Washington.
Answer this question, Joel. Tell me how it's man-made, because CO2 has nothing to do with climate change, and that's a fact. And you know who even said that is the IPCC. They said it because they've got the charts that show that there was no CO2, very low CO2 in the 50s and back into the 40s when the temperature was different. There was no difference. The CO2 has nothing to do with it. They want to build, under the bailout that Obama did for General Motors, they wanted to build hydrogen cars because they pump water vapors out on the roads instead of they said CO2. Cars don't give off CO2. Cars give off carbon monoxide. It has nothing to do with climate change.
No, it has.
Not carbon monoxide.
No, that's not true.
It is true, Joel. I've studied it. I've got chemists on it. I lecture on it all over the world. The last lecture I gave on it was in Singapore.
But you cannot argue with 13,000 scientists. It's not even.
Joel, I'm not saying that. I agree. There are 13,000 scientists, but they're under the consensus. It's not empirical science. It's still a hypothesis. That's why they still call it the theory of global climate change. They
Yeah,
don't
but
call
if you, but if
they don't call
what
it a
you're,
principle, it's a theory.
Michael, if what you're saying is true, the climate deniers.
I'm not a denier. There is
No, no,
climate
I
change.
I didn't say you.
Yeah,
I said,
I
I
know.
didn't say you. I said climate deniers for decades have said climate change, it wasn't real. I remember Senator Inhofe threw a snowball in the Senate and said, oh, really, global warming. Say that to all the people who died in climate-induced floods in China. Say that to the victims in Kentucky of tornadoes, they've never seen tornadoes this magnitude. The scientists all say climate change induced. Let me finish. Let me finish. Walk with me. Say this to the victims of the fires and the wine industry, which is going broke in California because of drought. I represent the Latino Farmers and Ranchers Trade Association. I'm on calls with farmers all the time. They've run out of water in Central California because of drought. Now,
no, not because of drought, because Newsom wouldn't and Jerry Brown would not build a reservoir that the government was ready to pay for. They piped the water that melts off the snowfall in the spring. They pipe it out into the middle of the Pacific Ocean instead of building a reservoir so they would have more water. That's why 50,000 almond trees have been destroyed, because there's no water. The farmers in California can't get water. They don't clean up the forests. They don't clean up the forest floors. That's why there's fires all year long.
Gentlemen, I'm going to jump in for a second and say that we should move on for a moment, because, we're not going to come to a consensus. Although if you want to talk about it later, that'll be fine. What I want to talk about with you is, you wrote a question for me, Joel, which I think is really, really good. And that is the question: will John Lewis Voting Rights Act be passed in Congress? And what are your views on the filibuster? First, let's start with you, Joel, and then we'll go to you, Michael.
Well, for decades, since the signing of the 65 Civil Rights Act, Republicans and Democrats supported voting rights. And then there was a very important bill. I'm sorry, it was a Supreme Court case, Shelby versus Holder, where, our Supreme Court justice said, oh, racism is over, and it's, we don't need to have pre-clearance, for voting, legislation. It was, Hugh Roberts made a gigantic mistake. Now there's 15 states have passed 33 voter suppression laws. And this is on video. The Republicans on the far right have said, we're not going to win unless we suppress the Black vote. Now, I'm not making this up. That you can see this on YouTube. It is disgusting. It is immoral. As a Jewish person, especially, I am so angry, and that this country that I love so much is doing everything it can to promulgate a big lie that the vote was stolen from the presidential election. Trump lost fair and square. So they're going to pass all these voter suppression laws aimed at Black students, Native Americans, so that they can't vote. This is a democracy. This is not Putin's Russia. This is not Chairman Mao's China. I can't believe what I'm seeing, and I can't believe anyone would defend making voting harder. You want to make voting as accessible as possible. This is Jim Crow, white nationalism, authoritarianism, and that's where we're heading towards. Steve Bannon is replacing, this is his strategy, they're replacing election officials on Board of Elections in Atlanta and the counties where they have the most Blacks with Republicans from their own state legislatures, because Bannon said it himself, we're going to control the elections. Now, my great grandparents did not move here. They escaped the czars of Russia. I didn't come here to live in a theocracy and an authoritarian country. I moved here because I believe in freedom. If you can't vote unencumbered, especially if you're Black or brown or student or Native American, there's something very wrong with the morality of this country. Everyone needs to speak out against this. I don't care who you are. We got to be able to vote unencumbered.
Joel, let me ask you something. The immigrants who are coming in, apparently they're allowed to vote. Now, do you think that's legitimate? Do you think that that's, something that we should let them do?
Well, first of all, the only place where, first of all, they're not allowed to vote. New York City did pass
The Build Back
law.
Better plan, Joel. It's in there.
No, it's not. Where are you getting that from, Michael?
Okay.
That's what we call in Congress a poison pill provision. There's no such thing as people who can come across the board. First of all, in order to vote, you have to have citizenship, and if you're a Democrat, you will never get reelected or even get a bill passed out of committee with a provision like that. I've not seen. I think it's would be a stupid thing, first of all, to do. No, immigrants are not allowed to vote. There's only in New York City did they have recently passed a bill where if you have a green card, then you can vote. But no, if you're undocumented, you can't vote. And the reason why is you have to show a social security and an address. Immigrants who come here undocumented don't want to do that because that's how they get busted, arrested, and thrown out of the country. So they're not going to risk their the possibility of finding a job and a better life for themselves and their children. By the way, I'm very pro-immigration. I think Trump created a problem that wasn't even there. I haven't talked to one person that says immigration is a problem. I would say that not being able to find affordable housing or being able to afford health care, or for your senior citizen, not being able to afford to go to the dentist, that's more important than immigration. There is no such thing as open borders. That's another lie with the Republican Party. What I'm tired of is lying and propaganda. I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican. We cannot continue to sanction lies. There's no such thing as open borders. You come across the border, you got to go through an asylum process. There's border patrol agents all over the place. Obama was called the deporter in chief. I'm sick of lies. Let's talk policy. Let's not talk about lies. Let's talk about solving a problem. But go ahead. I'm not that opinionated.
Let's talk about putting the border patrol back in charge of the borders. How about that? Okay. And how about you think that we don't have open borders? Ask the mother who just lost a child from fentanyl poisoning for drugs that are coming over the border. That are 170% more drugs are coming over the border now than under the Trump administration. I'm not patting Trump on the back. I'm talking about his policies. He shut down the border to not to just shut it down, but he wanted people to come over the border legally, and that's what it was. And you talk about the bills and the voting right. Do you know that in the last gubernatorial election in Georgia, there were more blacks that voted than any other time in the history of Georgia elections? And you've got Stacey Abrams, who still claims that she won the election. If it wasn't for the suppression of the blacks, more blacks voted than ever before. The voting bill that was passed, the Voting Rights Act that was passed in Georgia, is more liberal than the one before that. They've extended open voting. They've extended early voting. This is not the case. What happened with Stacey Abrams? That is true.
I'm an expert on this. What happened with Stacey Abrams was the Republican Party took people off the rolls.
They took dead people off the rolls.
No. What they did is called the cross check. What they would do, if they saw Joel Segal in Georgia and then a Joel Segal in Michigan, they would take them off the rolls. It's not true. We got to listen. We have to understand something. There are people who are Machiavellian, who don't have morals or ethics. In order to win, they will cheat and they will steal. And that's what happened to Stacey Abrams. Now, right now in Georgia, they passed a law, which is just unbelievably unconscionable. If you're waiting in line and someone offers you a glass of water or a piece of pizza, that's illegal and you can go to jail for it. Now, what kind of country are we in here? This is absolutely wrong.
Did you ever go into a voting poll in New York? There's signs in it that say no eating or drinking while waiting to vote. So what's the problem? That's been going on for 50 years in New York that I know.
No. The problem is in Georgia, where they purposely shortchange voting machines and have long lines, if you're in line for 5 to 6 hours, it doesn't make sense to pass a law. They do that to discourage Black people and young people from voting. It's like, what country are we living in now, man? Where you're going to make it a felony, a crime, to give someone a food and drink that's what if you're diabetic? What if you're 85 years old and you're thirsty? Let's get real. Georgia.
That was one or two cases, and it wasn't rampant. You make it sound like everybody who's drinking water, who's standing on line water. You go anywhere today, and people have a bottle of water in their pockets. Come on, you're getting a little ridiculous now.
No, listen.
You know the problem with the voting? You know what the problem is with the John Lewis?
Michael, it's not
263.
Okay,
Michael,
one at
it's
a
not
time,
ridiculous.
gentlemen. One at a time, please.
Georgia passed a law that says it is illegal if someone's in line for a volunteer to give them food or water. Now, that is Jim Crow, white nationalist, authoritarian garbage that has no place in our democracy. And Michael, of all people, you're a detective. You should oppose this on the grounds of it being cruel and unusual punishment. Now, I have no problem with a voter ID as long as it's accessible. I have a problem where you can go to jail if a volunteer picks up a Native American on a reservation and says it is now illegal for a volunteer to pick someone up in the Native American community to go to vote. That's fascism. Let's call it for what it is. Let's quit being blind and quit being so nice. This is not about Republican, Democrat. It's about democracy and defending the right to vote.
Joel, can I ask you something? Excuse me for a second, Michael. One of the things that I would like to know from you, Joel, is how come we have our vice president going to the border one time and really not reporting what's going on?
Well, what she did was when she went to the border and she said, if you want to come here, the answer is don't, because of COVID-19. If you look what happened with the refugees from Haiti, majority of them were sent back, and there has been a percentage that came in. I'm for a legal process where I do think that I don't believe in open borders because I'm against drugs. Number two, Biden right now I think he's even gone past Obama. Obama was called the deporter in chief. The Latinx community couldn't stand Obama. Biden is pretty much doing what Obama did. But I'm for a path to citizenship. I think that for those who are here, who are undocumented, I think there should be a path to citizenship if you've been here for a while. Do I believe in an open border? Absolutely not. Do I believe in controlled immigration? I absolutely do. Why? It's the law. It's been there for decades. It has not changed. There's no such thing as an open border. I don't know who came up with this. What you've got border security patrols. You got these big towers, and now you have a wall. And when people come across the border, they're arrested and detained. You have to go through all kinds of processes. Majority of people are returned. Many of them, when they return, are executed and murdered. They're killed. So this whole fantasy craziness about the Democrats have open borders. This is a dangerous lie. And this is no different than when Himmler, and I'm going to say this, and I'm telling you what I believe. When Hitler came to power, he hired Goebbels and Himmler to lie over and over again. And their theory was, if you lie over and over again, people will believe it. Well, what is Donald Trump now calling Democrats? Communist. How disgusting is that? Where are the Republicans and the conservatives talking about modern McCarthyism? I don't hear a word from them. It really angers me. Whether if a progressive or a Democrat calls a Republican a dirty name when it's not deserved. Why are the Republican Party's former president now calling Democrats communist? That's wrong. This is not the America that I grew up in. It's repulsive, it's disgusting, and there has to be a national discussion about getting back to civility again and maintaining professionalism when we're going to argue our points. But don't call Democrats communists. But I don't think Democrats either should call Republicans far right-wing extremists unless they actually are. but don't call Democrats communist and
What-
socialist. It's bull. It's not true. I worked there my whole career. I never met one communist in my life up in Congress.
Joel, you're taking it out of context because he didn't say they were communists. He said they're acting like communists. I heard the statement. It's the same
How?
way. It's the same thing.
The
He said
Republicans.
he told everybody to inject themselves with bleach. He never said that.
The
And I heard-
Republicans are the ones acting like communists and Nazis. The Republicans are the ones who are trying to steal
But why are you
elections.
blaming one man if you now you claim it's the Republicans? And
No, no.
and I got to be honest with you, Joel. I'm an independent, and I'm looking in thinking, and even though I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social libertarian, and that's my beliefs. And I look at some of these people in the Democratic Party, and they're acting like communists. I hate to say it.
Name. I want you to name Michael. I want you to name one person. And these are my colleagues that you're talking about. These are people I work with on a daily basis. The overwhelming majority.
Look at the squad. Look at Cortez and half the people that she hangs with. That's all they talk about.
But Michael, I find
Here's
it very interesting. I find it very interesting that when we have women of color who have progressive ideas, all of a sudden they're called communists. Jews.
No. She's not. She doesn't. I'm not calling them a women. I don't consider them a woman of color, and I'm colorblind when it comes to that. So
but where's the communism? Communism.
It's coming, Joel. And let me tell you how. It's coming. You ready? Okay, here's what's going to happen. And mark my word, you want to write this down, you can. They're going to turn around and they're going to suddenly, all of a sudden, they're going to make it so miserable. The supply chain's going to be miserable. The inflation's going to go to the moon. It's going to be unbelievable. And all of a sudden, the government's going to come in and they're going to turn around and they're going to have the military unload the ships and start shipping goods all over the place. And then they're going to wake up and say, see, you need the government. If it wasn't for the government, you couldn't have gotten your goods, you couldn't have gotten your food, and you couldn't have gotten your Christmas presents. And everybody's going to say, gee, that's nice. That's
Michael, you know,
you read the mandates from the French.
Michael, you should know. Listen, you're a highly intelligent man, and I'm gonna be strong about this. As a democracy, as the richest country in the world, we cannot get to the point where people like you, who I respect very deeply, are going to make up what you just said. That's so far from reality. These people, AOC and the member of Congress that took Mr. Conyers' spot, and Ilya Oha, I'm not a big fan of hers, but I don't know her that well. They're three women now. They can't like radically change America because they don't have that kind of power. The majority of members of Congress that I worked with over the years and now just want to see America live to its promise of e pluribus unum and equality and justice for all. You're talking about equating people with Joseph Stalin, Chairman Mao, both of who killed over 100 million people, Fidel Castro, who I can't stand. I'm a virulent anti-communist. I was the founder of the Free China movement. That's the largest Chinese democracy movement in the world, the founder of it, and I ran it for 8 years. So I hate communism.
Joe, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Every time the press asks questions of our Mr. Biden, our president, he doesn't answer them. And all of the things that you're talking about with regard to the squad is making young people, and I'm using that very liberally, they're making the young people hear things that they shouldn't hear. And the reason for that is because they're looking to really make a dent in politics. And also they're wanting to go to the top. They want to get there very quick. And some people say they're really doing that because people like young people who are voting, they don't really have the knowledge or the desire to really go from one to the next, meaning from left to right. They just want to hear what is good for them. So I guess my question, and this I'm going to ask you, Michael. You heard what he said about the squad. Could you tell our audience a little bit about how you feel about them? Because, I mean, I guess as a Republican, of course you wouldn't like them. But on the other hand, I'm interested in knowing what they're doing for our government.
Cortez in New York was a marketing scheme. They picked her out of a beauty contest, sort of as a metaphor, to run for Congress, and they put her up, and that was it. She had no qualifications. She's never knew anything about politics. She was a bartender. So, and all of a sudden, she's got all these liberal ideas. I'd like to know who's pulling her puppet strings. The same thing with the squad, with Ilhan Omar. I mean, the statements she makes about Israel and about everything else going on in this world, you should be appalled at that, Joel. I mean, it's amazing.
I totally disagree with that AOC. I think AOC, first of all, she's a brilliant woman. She ran for office and she won. She won.
Put up for office. It was a contest.
No.
Okay.
Look, I know her. I trained a lot of her staff. I have, I don't know her that well, but I think she's invaluable. She knows her policy, unlike a lot of members of Congress and staff. She understands climate change. She fights for her community. What AOC is about is fighting for her community.
She told Amazon to get the hell out of New York. 25,000 jobs. They were paying over $100,000 a piece. That's fighting for her community. Come on.
I have to agree with you on that. By the way, if I was AOC, she might have had whatever. I know the reasons why she voted against that. I did not agree with that policy. Okay, so you're making a fair point. Well, hey, we just agreed on something, Michael. But no, I think AOC represents the new America, which is more progressive, younger. It's more multi-ethnic. I think she's a patriot. I think she's a great member of Congress. I think she's one of the few members of Congress that really gets up and goes to work and says, how can we get everybody health care? How can we improve the environment? I think she's terrific. Rashida Tlaib, I know her very well. I like her a lot. Omar, I don't know too much. I did not like the statement where she said something about it's all about the Benjamins. I've never heard her say anything virulently anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, but then I haven't seen her, complete record. What I think they all need to work on, I wish they could be Representative John Conyers. I wish they could learn from him. What Conyers did, he worked both sides of the aisle. He brought in all different kinds of people because he was Martin King's lawyer. And John Conyers solved problems, and he did it in a nonpartisan way. And that's why I love working for John Conyers.
We're getting to the end of the one second, Michael. We're getting to the end of the show, and I would love for you to answer him, and that'll be the end of the show. So you heard what he said. What's your thoughts about that?
I've got one question for Joel, because Joel made a statement about Cortez and that she's out there and she's trying to teach the younger generation about America and democracy and everything else. So here's my question for you, Joel.
Fairness.
If we were attacked tomorrow, like we were attacked in Pearl Harbor, okay, how many young millennials today do you think would line up at the recruiting booth and join the military and go fight for us out there? Or would they run for the border? They would probably run for the border.
How do you know that?
How do I know that?
How do you know that?
Because
if Israel was attacked right now, I would go fight for Israel. So I mean, and I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-Israel, but I'm a Jew who loves Israel. If Israel was attacked or there was a peace agreement, I would move to Israel and protect Israel. I think the majority of these young kids are unbelievably patriotic. They work in charity. I hire a lot of them as my interns. They are way more intelligent and they have a social consciousness that my generation never had. My generation just wanted to make a bunch of money and the hell with everybody else. I love this young generation. I love the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, I would disagree with any thugs that used a movement that was, as the FBI said, was largely peaceful. I love this generation. They care about fairness. They care about equity. I don't agree with, I think they go a little too far sometimes with political correctness, but I'm so glad of this new generation because they are awake and they want a better world. They want a better America. I love these young people. I really
Michael,
do.
Jump in right now if you would.
Thank God for them.
maybe some of them, Joel, but I got to disagree with you on some of them because I see them. I'm out near and I see what they do. I have to be honest with you, even in my own family, I see how my grandchildren think, and how their friends think, and I see it.
What is it that you see that you don't like? What is it that you don't like that you're saying? What is it?
The fact that they're down on this country, and I see it. You say they're not, and I say they are. I see it.
I think what they want is an America that's closer to what the founding fathers wanted, or closer to what I think the majority of Americans want, and that's equity and fairness and the opportunity to achieve the American dream for everybody, not just a small group of people, which is what the modern Republican Party, that was the design of Reagan and both Bushes, which was to create wealth for a small group of people and then a diminution of the middle class. I'm very pro middle class and upper middle class. I believe in a middle class. We've lost our middle class.
Michael, you have the last word, if you will.
I love these young people.
I see these kids today being takers. They're all looking for what could you do for me, and not what I can do for you. It was JFK who said it. Ask not what you can do for this country, what this country can do for you. But you remember that statement. But these kids today, it's everything. They're looking for every handout they can get their hands on.
They have the highest rates of volunteerism in any generation in the history of our country. So I don't agree with that. They're smarter. They're connected to the internet. They're fighting for climate change. They want to stop they're not going to have a world to even live in. So they want clean, renewable energy. They don't want to see some police officers brutalizing Black people and minorities. So they're doing the right thing. They're becoming engaged. They're not so apathetic like my generation. My generation didn't care about politics. They wanted to make money. I love these kids. Do I think they love America? I do. You know why? You don't get involved in politics and try to change a country unless you love it. Are there people who don't like America? I don't know. I'd have to talk to them. Most of my interns and the young kids, they love America. They just want it to be fair for everybody across the board. And they want us to survive.
Michael, do you think things are fair here?
No, I don't think they're as fair as they could be. I have to say that in all honesty. I don't think it's fair.
Okay, and last but not least, if you had something on your mind that speaks to whether Biden is a good president, what would you say?
If I was a Democrat and voted for him, I'd be embarrassed.
One of the best presidents of my lifetime, bar none. He's put millions of vaccinations in people's arms. He has saved our economy from going under because of COVID-19. The stimulus checks were unbelievably important. Child poverty almost cut in half, and he's only been there for a year and a half. So we can't judge the Biden.
Not even a year, Joe.
I think he's one of the best presidents of my lifetime. He's getting great. The infrastructure bill was genius. He got that passed, bipartisan. I like what he's doing with COVID-19. He's got to do better, I think. But I think that Biden
what is he done with COVID-19?
Is a great president. He needs more support from the American people, though. He needs more support.
More people have died of COVID under his administration than any other administration. He said that he wants 500 million home tests by February to be distributed in the United States. He hasn't even ordered them yet.
I'm sorry.
Gentlemen, I'm so sorry that I have to cut you off because we're at the end of the show. The two of you have really interesting stories to tell and very interesting ideas about democracy and whether it's good or not under the Biden administration. But I think it's really important that we invite you back because right after 2021, we're going to have an election of all the Congress. And I think that's a great time for you to talk. So thank you very much for being on my show. Joel, you did a great job. Michael, you did a great job. You may not agree with each other, but that's what this show is all about. Okay, Joel, if people want to contact you, how do they get a hold of you?
Sure. It's my email is Joel, JOEL .R.Segal, SEGAL @gmail.com.
And Michael, what about you and how did they get your books? most important.
Michael at michaelsolomonbooks.com, and it's Solomon spelled SOLOMON. So it's Michael at michaelsolomonbooks.com.
The reason why I have the utmost respect for Michael agrees to disagree with me in a civil way. I may not agree with him, but he's reading, he's informed. And if we could carry on conversations like Michael and I are having, that you guys are doing a great job, this country could do so much better. But we gotta quit punching each other in the nose and get back to civility. And Michael is an example of civility. I like him a lot. I don't agree with him on everything, but I love his energy and his civility. I appreciate that, Michael. But I bet I can beat you in basketball. Yeah.
And I agree with some of what you're saying, but at the same time, I agree to disagree, like you say.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being on the Susan Brender Show.